Let's open with a word of prayer and we'll get started. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the rain, and we thank you for this time together. And Father, as we get into your word, be in the conversation, be in everything that's said and done, and we commit it into your hands. In Christ's name we pray. Amen. Now, before we get into tonight's lesson, Joseph's second dream, we haven't finished up last week's lesson. So most of you hopefully will still have last week's. You guys won't have that. But we got a couple of them here. There you go. Oh, you're welcome. So we're starting at Genesis 37. And starting at verse 1. And we're going to read, we're going to take it in pieces of where we figure out how we're going to go. So I'm going to first start off with verses 1 through 4. And it says, Now Jacob dwelt in the land where his father was a stranger, in the land of Canaan. And this is the history of Jacob. Joseph, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the lad was the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah and his father's wives, and Joseph brought a bad report of them to his father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was the son of his old age, and also he made him a tunic of many colors. But when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and could not speak peaceably of him. So, good start. 17 years old. That coat that he has, get situated here. The coat that he has, what they call a tunic, and the coat, what we know is the coat of many colors. You know that Bible story. Most of us heard that Bible story, even as children. But that tunic, the way that cloak was made, that wasn't a working class outfit. That was that's what somebody that would be more of a nobility family would wear. So as he has this coat on, and most likely it was long sleeved, it wasn't short sleeved, and it was very long, and it represented someone that had authority, somebody that had position. And so as Joseph was given this coat, remember Reuben was the firstborn of the 12 tribes, right? We went through the whole thing how he's still the eldest son, but he's lost his position, he's lost his place. He had sex with one of his father's concubines, and it X'd him out. Then we see in this story, he's going to inject himself as the elder son a little bit. But Joseph is being treated by his father as if he's the firstborn son. And that's causing this great conflict. And in the mind of his father, Jacob, or what also they refer to him here, you start seeing him referred to as Israel in these verses. When it talks about Israel, it's talking about Jacob. Remember, God changed his name from Jacob, deceiver, to Israel, prince with God. And so, in this conversation, as he's doing this, he's giving his son this, he's treating Joseph like he is the firstborn son. And in his mind, if we went through this whole story of all that's transpired and all these sons being born and the contention in that family and all the manipulation that's been going on, you can see how Jacob would think that. Because Joseph was the firstborn son of Rachel. And Rachel was the love of his life. And even though he had other sons by Leah and by the concubines, and so that made up these 12. And remember, in the conversation we talked about the concubines. Some people said, well, what race were they? Most of the people believe that Laban said he got rid of more daughters. He moved a few daughters out of the house when he got rid of Rachel and Leah. And they went back, and because he had given handmaidens to Rachel and Leah and be able to send them on. So they were all of the same bloodline. And so here we go in the story. You can remember he's a 17-year-old. 17 years old. Now he lives to be 110. It's amazing how we watch as we're working our way through Genesis, how you watch the lifespans becoming less and less and less. Actually, this lifespan of Jacob, that happens today, doesn't it? Some very few, but there's those that make it to 110. I had my great grandpa that made it almost to 100. He was, and you see that. So, but we see it narrowing down in all the generations down to where it's more in line with in extreme cases of how it is here on earth today. And so, as his brothers hate him, he's acting more like a foreman. The brothers are out there taking care of the sheep. And remember, being a sheep herder is a pretty nasty job. It was a lot of hard work, and you faced a lot of difficulty. And in the culture, they were kind of looked down upon, okay? And you have Joseph going out there, checking things out, and coming back and telling his dad. He's acting more like a foreman than he is a co-worker with his brothers. And so as this story sets up, we're seeing this, why they end up hating him. But this story, before we got started, John tonight hit on something. It's a very powerful story, and what we see, and he doesn't do anything really wild. You see some things that you think, oh, Joseph used a little wisdom in saying it that way. But for the most part, Joseph is a remarkable picture, a powerful picture of Jesus. And out of all the Bible characters, I mean, he still was a sinful man. He was still a human being. But if you want to come close to a flawless story, his story is probably the closest one in all of the Bible. Of a story that was more in line that he never questioned God. You never see him, how come I ended up in prison, Lord? No. He just served God all the time. And all of this, he had issues his whole life, but the whole story really begins when he turns to the age of 17. And so, on the back of the outline, Esau, the father of the Edomites. I wrote a few things out that kind of says, now Israel loved Joseph more than all of his children. Now these chapters stand out for the insight they give us to the obvious trouble the families had. That's why I said, of all the stuff that's going on. If you look at all the children that were named of the 12 tribes, and we kind of talked about that, we touched on that a little bit the last time we met. The only one that was really named after how she felt was Leah. Remember when Judah was born? And she didn't name him like, the child of my anguish, and all the stuff that they were doing, and why, the pain that I'm going through, and all of these names had meaning. Out of the tribes, Judah was the only one that was named praise. That's what Judah means, praise. Praise God. And it's funny, out of all the tribes, it's that tribe. You'd think that God, it would have been if you would, Rachel's the love of his life, that lineage would come through Joseph. But it doesn't. It came through Leah. Leah was the wife that he didn't even want. Kind of got stuck with her for the manipulation of Leah and that whole storyline. And so, Leah is the one who gave birth to Judah. And in that time, as she gave birth to him, she gave praise to God. And it's out of this son Messiah comes. I find that amazing. Amazing story. And so, as we see this set up, it talks about the coat of many colors, and I've kind of touched on a lot of this stuff. It's a dramatic way of saying he was the son to receive the birthright. He isn't the son that receives the birthright. But Jacob saw it that way. He's my firstborn son to the woman that I love the most. And you can kind of see how he would think that. Huh? I mean, if you think that through logically, you think, okay, I can kind of see how he would think that. That's what not God was doing, but this is how this is setting up. But yet, even in all of how this story is setting up, the turmoil and trouble between all these brothers, it's now going down to the next generation, isn't it? They were all fighting, with Rachel and Leah and all of it, and Jacob, and all was going on. These children were being born, and all that turmoil in the family has now passed down to the next generation. And you see this turmoil in all the boys. And so Jacob's spying on his brothers. And so we get up to verse 5. Jacob has his first dream. Now, I wish Linda was here tonight, because I'm going to tell one of my stories on Linda and I. Because I relate to this story in a different way, but I do relate to this story. I was 15 at the time, not smart enough to keep my mouth shut. And he's doing it at 17. He's doing the same thing in this story. And let's read verses 5 through 8. And I'm reading from the New King James Version tonight. It says, "And now Joseph had a dream." Here's the mistake he made. "And he told it to his brothers. And they hated him even more." Now, it doesn't change the dream enough he kept his mouth shut, because God was actually giving him some prophetic insight of things that were going to happen. And how things was going to do. He was having these dreams, but there was meaning behind what was happening in these dreams, which we're going to take a look at. And had he kept quiet about it, it would have been a little more calmer in the family. But because he spoke up and started talking about it, as much as puffed up as he is now, he's going to get more so. So he said to them, "Please hear this dream which I have dreamed. There we were, binding sheaves in the field. Then behold, my sheaf arose and also stood upright. And indeed, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf."
No wonder they hated him.
Exactly right, Tom. No wonder that's exactly correct. And that how much more, if anything, he didn't really do anything wrong other than it's not using a lot of wisdom, but he told this dream. But also for a 17-year-old, I'm flipping. You're going to see me flip back and forth on this thing, okay, and how we're talking about it. For someone to have a dream like that, and I'm sure it was very vivid. God has given him this dream. It's very real. He had an excitement about, wow, you know what happened to me last night? Huh? Now, if he could have kept his mouth shut, it would have been better for him, because it stirred it even more. But in the long run, again, I'm flip-flopping on this whole thing, okay? As we see that this is how it plays out because of that hatred. God uses it to make the chain of events happen now, doesn't he? Mm-hmm. So did you see the two sides of this thing, okay? There's a lot going on here, okay? So, now his sheaves are bowing down to him. And this whole thing he was saying, Joseph had this dream, they hated him even more. And shall you indeed reign over us? That's the next words, okay? His brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Or shall you indeed have dominion over us? You? Yeah, there's not a whole lot of love there. So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Now, I got a story that I'm going to tell that kind of relates to this idea. I was 15 years old when I first met Linda. I don't know how many here are familiar with California? Maybe a few of you might be, okay. I grew up in southeast Los Angeles, so it's a pretty tough neighborhood, okay. And you're naughty. It's tough. It's tougher now, but it was tough when we were kids. I remember in the 60s, the girls had those big beehive hairdos, and they put razor blades in them. So if they needed one, they just reach up and get it. Or if they get in a cat fight and they grab their hair, that took care of that problem too. And so that was our neighborhood. That's where we grew up in that city. And so Linda, poor Linda, they took her. Well, Compton was 2 cities over. Yeah. Now, close. I lived in Maywood. I don't know if you know where Maywood. If you count going this way, you got Maywood, Bell, Southgate, Linwood, Compton. Okay, but back in those days, Compton was white. Yeah, that was before all the race riots and all that stuff, and there's a whole story that you could talk about all that stuff. Because I remember as a kid, Dad sitting on the front porch because Watts was on fire. They were burning things. City was on fire, and you could see the glow of it at night. And he'd sit on the front. We'd say good night. He'd sit on the front porch with a shotgun because he was just surely thinking they're going to cross over and come into our neighborhood. And that was the time period. So anyway, poor Linda, her family took her from the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky. She was a Kentucky girl. How many of you ever seen the movie Coal Miner's Daughter? Loretta Lynn? That's one holler over from where Linda was. Linda grew up just that same way, and just like that. They were dirt poor, but they had each other. And Linda's dad was a coal miner. He decided he wanted to spend his life doing that. Got an apprentice program in Los Angeles to learn how to be a machinist, and that's what took them from the Appalachian Mountains of Kentucky to Los Angeles, California. And there was a girl across the street that I knew. We had been there for years, and she first was introduced to Linda and her sister Edna, and so she was trying to, kind of saying, "Oh, school's gonna be okay," and she was trying to take him under wing and kind of be there for him. Well, let's go across the street and meet Ron. He goes to the same school, and he's just across the street, and so they're doing that. And the first time I can't say it's the first time, but I felt that there's a lot going on here, okay? That the Lord spoke to me. And I understood it to be that voice. It wasn't an audible voice. I know most of the time you hear me say this to people, but one of these days they're going to take me out here in a straitjacket or something. But I sensed that just as real as that was. And I felt the Lord told me, as they were coming across the street, I hadn't even met them yet. I had no idea what they were doing. And I heard the Lord tell me that the little one, Linda, was going to be my wife. Now, I should have just kept my mouth shut. But they introduced each other, and Linda, meet Ron. And I looked her square in the eye, and I said, "I'm going to marry you one day." And she looked me right back in her Kentucky accent and said, "You weirdo, get away from me." And that was the start of our relationship. But so I can relate to this dream thing, okay? About having, because there's wisdom in keeping your mouth shut. I created so many hurdles that I had to get through that we finally, and we've been married now 51 years this year. It's just, wow, long time. So anyway, when I read it, that story comes to mind to me. It's just learning how to have some wisdom in what you say, okay? So, let's keep going. He had his first dream, and so now we're up to our new flyer. Joseph's second dream, Genesis 39, 9 through 11. It says, "Then he dreamed still another dream and told it to his brothers and said, 'Look, I have dreamed another dream. And this time,'" now it's going to get worse. It's going from bad to worse, okay? "The sun, the moon, and the 11 stars bowed down to me." Can you imagine? Can you imagine what Jacob must be thinking? So he told it to his father and his brothers, and his father rebuked him and said to him, "What is this dream that you have dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come to bow down to you before you?" Now there's a little question about when was this written. Is this not running chronological? Or is he just making a reference to, because his mother's already dead. She's already passed. And so, but yet they're making a reference to her as if she's alive. Or is he just saying, you think that your mom and all, if he's just talking in general, we don't know, okay? We don't know. There's some that think that this is out of order because it wasn't done chronologically, and yet when it was put together, we can debate that all night long and never get anywhere. So, but anyway, I just wanted to point it out. So it says, "What is this dream you've dreamed? Shall your mother and I and your brothers indeed come bow down to the earth before you?" And his brothers envied him, but his father kept the matter in mind. That's amazing. And yet, look at the different attitudes that you've had as these dreams are being told. But God indeed is beginning to show Joseph something for a reason, isn't he? Because we got the book, so we can read the story on and kind of know what's coming next. They had no idea. They had no idea what was happening next. And so as he's dreaming this, Joseph, as he's doing this, he said Joseph is a contrast, I want to talk about, to Jesus in this place. The other side of it is more parallel to what Jesus is like. But here's the contrast. Jesus wants us to be as he was on this earth, others-centered person. Joseph falls short in that area because it's about him right now, isn't it? Look at what's happening to me. Okay? If we're not careful, especially as Christians, and our lives have been changed, it's easy to fall into that mode, isn't it? You know, I'm the blessed one. God's good to me. Yes, he is. But he's done all these things so that we could be an avenue of blessing to somebody else. And so, as this is happening, when we get down to verse 12, it says, that through 17, and it says, "Then his brothers went to feed their father's flock." Now, I find this amazing. Notice where the flock is in that book, in that verse. Where does it say he is that? Huh? Shechem or Shechem? Yes. What happened in Shechem or Shechem?
That was the rape, wasn't it? Yeah. And then they murdered the...
Yeah. Yes, sir. Uh-huh. Yeah, the rape of Dinah. Dinah, the daughter gets raped, their sister, for them, gets raped. And that's when they set up this elaborate scheme to like they're going to join forces with them. And they end up killing them all. Remember that? And yet, and they went there out of the will of God. In that story, when we had that part of the story, God told him to go to Bethel, and Jacob went to Shechem. And a whole chain of events in that chapter that transpired, and very ungodly things happened. And yet here we see the story as they're feeding their flock, and it's getting ready to set up for another nightmarish thing, okay? And they find themselves right back in Shechem.
Now, how far was that away from Egypt?
Yeah. Well, they're not in Egypt at this.
I know. How far?
Well, it's a ways.
Quite a ways.
Yeah, it's quite a ways. Yeah. I don't have the map. Shechem's way up. If on the map the Mediterranean should see, it's above Bethel and Hebron in Israel. Egypt's way down at the other end of that. If you have a map, I don't know if it tells you exact miles, but because that's where Joseph's going, to Egypt. It's a long ways away. Especially if you're walking. Well, I know if you have a little map that I have a little illustration that goes about this much. This much is 15 miles. Okay, in my map. To get to Egypt, yeah. Did somebody you got an answer? You got any miles? You got one, John?
From Jerusalem.
About
It's
20
about
miles.
40 miles to Jerusalem.
Right. And then it's another, it's another ways down to Egypt. Just a ways. Okay? But remember, at this point in time, they don't know that's where he's going, okay? They're just had enough of their brother. And now here they're out there again, and Jacob, in the verse 13, of course he's being called the name Israel here, and Israel, or Jacob, said to Joseph, "Are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I will send you to them." So he said to them, "Here am I." Then he said to him, "Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the flocks, and bring back word to me." So he's kind of spying on them again, okay? Dad's using Joseph to act more like a supervisor over all the brothers, to go down and say what they're doing, what they're supposed to be doing, and then take that back to him, take that word back to him. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron and went to Shechem. Now a certain man found him, and there he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, "What are you seeking?" So he said, "I am seeking my brothers. Please tell me where they are feeding their flocks." And the man said, "They have departed from here, for I heard them say, 'Let us go to Dothan,'" which again, Dothan is about 15 miles away, okay, from Shechem. And if you're walking, that's a long ways. That's not just like going to the corner, okay? So as this is happening here, so now they're up to Dothan. This whole contrast, this is setting up. And he's finding his brothers. They're in Shechem. And to me, it's a very strange thing, an event that he's ending up, they're back in that area. That's the place where the family was influenced by very harmful things and very sinful things that transformed their lives. And so, at verse 18 through 22, and it says, "Now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near them, they conspired against him to kill him." That's what his brothers were doing. We got to get rid of this guy. Joseph has to go. And they were literally plotting his death. Now we know that God has other plans in mind. And you see, when God says something, you can rest assured it's going to happen. May not be the timetable we think. And that's where Abraham and Sarah got things mixed up. They say, "This is taking way too long. You promised us a child." Well, it came in due time, didn't it? From the time that promise was given to the time that child came, was 25 years has gone by. And he's now 100 years old. Sarah's 90. And even in that time period, they lived longer. They weren't having babies at 90 years old. But God wanted to make sure that as this plays out, that there's not one person that can say, "Well, look what I accomplished." Yeah. Because Abraham and Sarah were far beyond the childbearing years, and yet that child came. It was a miraculous child. And so, he wanted it to be that way, so then nobody could say, "Well, how do you really know that that was the promised child?" Well, if you have a 90-year-old person pregnant and getting ready to have a baby, no wonder she named him Laughter, huh? That's what Isaac means. Yeah, laughter, laughing, yeah. It is kind of funny. But God wanted to make sure that no one could take credit for something that he did. Everyone have to say, that has to be God. That has to be God. Because that could not happen anywhere else. And so, as we keep going, it says, now when they saw him afar off, even before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. Then they said to one another, look, notice what they call him. Look, this dreamer is coming. This guy has these dreams. They're making fun of him. They're taunting him. And come therefore, let us now kill him, cast him into some pit, and we shall say some wild beast has devoured him. We shall see what will become of his dreams. You think he's going to have dreams? Well, we're going to do him in. We're going to bring an end to this. These brothers don't know what they were setting themselves up for, do they? You find yourself standing against the will of God, you're in a place of trouble, aren't you? Great problem. So as God said this was going to happen, these dreams are coming for a reason, to begin to prepare him for some very dark days. And I find it amazing in this story, and as we're going through this tonight, all this started when he's sold into slavery. He was 17 years old. And yet through this whole thing, as we're going to see this play out, and this is what John and I had talked about right before we got started tonight, is he never murmured, he never complained, he doesn't show anything that ever doubted God, but he held on. He held on to the reality of God's got something that he's doing in all this. There's a great lesson in there for you and I. Because I guarantee you, I usually, oh God, why are we going through this now? Huh? I can be a big baby at times, especially when it comes to those kinds of things. And yet, there's great wisdom in that to say, you know what, God said, do you really believe that if we're in his hands? Well, isn't that in the old Allstate commercials, you're in good hands with Allstate, huh? And don't you think you're in better hands with the Lord? Huh? Yeah. And if you're in his hands, and even though he lets some things come to you that seems questionable on our side, can we trust to say God knows what he's doing? Huh? We have to. We have to do that, because if not, what are we holding on to? Huh? We are trusting in him. We belong to him. And we're going to see that in this life of Joseph. So, let's say we're going to bring an end to his dreams. Now here Reuben, for the first time you see Reuben start acting like the elder brother he should, a little bit. Not a whole lot, but he does it a little bit. And but Reuben heard it, and he delivered him out of their hands, and said, let us not kill him. And Reuben said to them, shed no blood. Now notice he's trying to play. He should have said to the brother, we're not doing this. We're taking him home to father. This is not going to happen. But then that would upset the other brothers now, wouldn't it? He's trying to play a balancing act on both sides. Huh? How can I bring this to a way that we can satisfy everybody? That's a typical politician, isn't it? Huh? No, I should go. I should go. Sorry about that. But Reuben's playing that role here. And so instead of really saying, no, putting his foot down, this is what we're doing, he doesn't do that. Shed no blood, but cast him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, that he might deliver him out of their hands and bring him back to his father. So he was going to do that instead of just saying it. He said, let's just leave him there in this pit. But then he's thinking, I'll eventually double back and get him, and then we'll take him home to dad. That's what he's thinking. And so, the story moves on. It says, so it came to pass when Joseph had come to his brothers that they stripped Joseph of his tunic. You think you look hot in that coat. See, that coat represented authority and power, the place of position. And Joseph, as he received this coat, understood that, and Jacob understood that when he gave it to him. And all the brothers understood that yes, he is kind of, dad's always favored him. Look what he's done for him. He's placed him up. He treats him more like he's overseeing all of us. And they strip him of that coat. And they took him and they cast him into that pit. And the pit was empty and there was no water in it. Now this wasn't a well. Wells were usually back in that place, they were very deep. You throw them down in the well, you'd never find them again. he'd been going to get down that deep. Some of those wells had to be very deep to get the water. This was more of what we call a cistern. That there was, when rains come, and it's just like how we have these storms here. Just like how dead and dry we are, and all of a sudden there's a river of water flowing. They created these things that they were deep, but they weren't deep as a well. But so when that would happen, the water would fall and they'd fill up, and there was another place you could get water from. And so it was dry at this time of the year when they were at, and so they threw him in there. And verse 25 says, and they sat down to eat. Now notice this, he's 25 feet away. Possibly. They throw him, they strip him of his coat, they throw him down there, and now they're having a meal. They're having a party. Huh?
No guilt.
That's exactly the point. They had no guilt about what they were doing. They're having a good old time. They're having this meal. And then they lifted their eyes and looked, and there was a company of Ishmaelites. And there they were coming from Gilead with their camels bearing spices, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry down to Egypt. So here's this caravan of Ishmaelites. Remember, that's their cousins. Huh? The Ishmaelites were their cousins. That's Abraham's son, Ishmael. And of course, he's not the son of promise. But from Ishmael's point of view, I am the eldest son. That's why we have that battle still going on in the Middle East to this very day. This argument is still playing out to this very day. All these thousands of years later. And this rages on. I am the son of Abraham. And of course, at this point in time, they kind of look down on each other. Okay, there's two separate groups. There's this great division. And even today, you would go to tell one of the Middle Easterns over there that, oh yeah, you're related to them. You guys are cousins. You want to talk about being on the side of some real trouble? You would be. I remember, and I've told this before, but I remember there was a man that Joe Peralta, some of you might remember who Joe Peralta is. He was a young man, came to church here for a while. And I got kind of connected with him, was trying to help him along and be there for him. And others in this church have too. And Joe went to work for a man that he was making, it was actually like play yards for kids. It was a company that was actually doing this, and and a lot of it had to do for handicapped kids. They had things that you could hook them to that they'd be able to swing and do stuff along just like any of the other children. And the man that he worked for was a Muslim. I can't remember his name, but met him a few times. And at that time, Joe didn't have an automobile, so I was hoping to get a few paychecks under the belt to get a car. And so there was a window there that I get up every morning and take him to work, and I come back every night and get him and take him back home, and was getting him through this time period. So I got to know the man a little bit, and I didn't bring it up, but he did. And I thought, well, okay, Lord, maybe you want us to have this conversation. And he said something about the Middle East. And I said, oh, are you talking about Israel? And instantly he said, no, Palestine. Yeah. See how they did? Yeah, it was. Yes, that was Palestine. And it was Rome that changed it. They wanted to do away with any idea of a Jewish home was done away with. The destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and they scattered them, and that's when they changed that area to Palestine. So he was right that area was that before Palestine. I said to him, but you know that it was Judah before it was Palestine. That was the end of that conversation. Yeah. I was hoping we'd go a little further than that, but that's as far as we got. I can see this. Yeah. So you can't always have these kind of conversations. So in the storyline, he's in the pit. They're thinking about killing him. They have no conscience about it at all. They're having a party. having a meal, and then this caravan of Ishmaelites come by. Do you believe that God was orchestrating that move? I do. And none of that happened by chance. And even though they think, well, so we're going to kill them or all that, you know what? Even the thoughts that they were beginning to change their mind from killing them to selling them off, God's hand was in all of that. Sometimes that's hard to think about. You know, even in evil things that happen, God's got a hand in it. Yeah, most times he does. And there's an outcome that he has that's going to come because of all of that. So, verse 26 says, so Judah said to his brother, now notice this, Judah, this is the tribe that Jesus is coming from, right? He's involved in the conversation of talking about killing Joseph. But he speaks up. And so Judah said to his brother, what profit is there if we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Now, I don't know, if you give them attaboys for that, yeah, we should. I guess, maybe. Save them from being dead. But I think like this. You're going to think, well, Pastor Ron, you got some strange ways of saying Scripture, but I guess I do. But, I don't know if he gets a whole lot of attaboys for that to say, you know what? Why just kill him? We can sell them and make a few bucks. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, if you look at that, is that, that's a better thing, I guess, than killing him. But yeah, still not a very good way. We can make a few bucks. And so, as he's talking about this, so come let us sell our brother Ishmael, let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh, and his brothers listen. Now this tribe, the Midianite traders, and they're Ishmaelites too. It's all part of the same. People say, well, is that a different group? It could be a caravan. They all went together. When they traveled, they didn't travel 1 or 2 camels. They went in huge caravans because there was a lot of robbers and thieves. There was all kinds of things that they faced. So they went in groups, okay? So this Midian traders passed by. They're still part of the same, this group of Ishmaelites that they're seeing. And traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver. Now, 20 shekels of silver, depending on the time period or whatever, but in this time period, 20 shekels of silver represented close to, most people work for a couple shekels a month. So 24 shekels a year would be a salary you could live on in that time period. So it was a year's wages. Yeah. So we got some money for our brother. We don't have to tell Dad about that, see? And so they did that, and they sold them off. Who's got a Bible? Don't mind looking up a verse. Jack, you look up Leviticus 27, verse 5.
27:5?
Mm-hmm. It's amazing, and even in the story that's happening here, because Leviticus this time wasn't even written yet. Okay. Yeah, 27:5. Mm-hmm.
And if from 5 years old up to 20 years old, then your valuation for a male shall be 20 shekels.
Oh, there it goes. That hadn't even been written yet. And yet for a young man that under the age of 20, all the way down to 5 years old, start at 5, that was the value. So he was no bargain basement. They got full price for him. For for the time period. But I find it amazing that all that's in the Bible. Of all the things, that even if they're selling these kids into slavery at 5 years old, and yet the slavery of then, and that's another subject too. It's not the same as how it was for us today. The slavery that we did here was totally different than what they did there. They had a little more respect going on than some of the stuff that happened when slavery was very dark in this continent in this time period. But I found that amazing, that how the parallels of all of this, how that plays out. It's there in the Word. And so, the 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. Egypt represents the world system, okay? Sin. This time we're talking about sin going, so we're talking about going down to Egypt, okay? And we're going to see how God's hand is on all of this. And so they've sold him. They're getting rid of him. They've done it. Now Reuben at this point must have went back home. He went somewhere else because he's not involved in any of this. Yeah, because we're going to see him. He does go back to get him and realize that he's not there. And so he sold him. Reuben returned to the pit. So whatever transpired, Reuben was somewhere else. Did he go back to home? We don't know. But obviously he wasn't there. Because if he was there, he would have known what they did. Okay? But he went back to the pit. Joseph was not in the pit, and he tore his clothes. Back in those days, if you really shed, like, oh no, at the time of just how you're weeping of great loss, they literally would start ripping their clothes. They literally did that at that time. And so that's giving you a visual of what Reuben's doing. He's going back to get his brother, take him out, take him back to dad, take him home, and he's not in there. And he realizes something bad's happened. He tears his clothes, he returns to his brothers and said, "The lad is no more, and where shall I go?" So they took so I'm sure they told him what's transpired. It says, so they took Joseph's tunic. Now they have to figure out how we're going to cover this up so we can explain this to Dad. And it's quite a story, isn't it? It really is, of what's transpired. And so what are we going to do? So they took Joseph's tunic, killed the kid of the goats, dipped the tunic in the blood. Remember, they didn't have DNA and all that stuff, so the blood just looked like blood back then. Huh? We'd figure that out today, wouldn't we? Hey, this ain't human. They couldn't do that back in that day. So they sent the tunic of many colors, and they brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Do you know where it is, your son's tunic or not?" And of course it was. They know that. And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's tunic. A wild beast has devoured him." Without a doubt, Joseph is torn to pieces. Then Jacob tore his clothes, and he did the same thing. He rinsed his clothes and put sackcloth on, and it's the whole thing of sackcloth and ashes. And the whole deal is he's mourning for his son for many days. Now I find as this story progresses, and they've sold him for 20, I want to say 20 pesos, but 20 shekels of silver. And so he's mourning. They were having this party. He seemed to care less. He's 25 feet away. By the time, I'm jumping ahead a little bit in the storyline here. In 42:21, and I've got it in your notes here, where they sat down to eat a meal. 42:21. Somebody want to read that real quick?
Which one?
Genesis 42:21.
I got it here. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead, Mark.
Then they said to one another, "Truly we are guilty concerning our brother, because we saw the distress of his soul when he pleaded with us. Yet we would not listen, therefore the distress has come upon us."
Now, isn't this amazing between where we are in this storyline? They're having food. He's probably 25 feet or so in a pit. They're having a party, feeling no guilt about it at all. By the time they get to Genesis 42, 20-some years later, they're feeling guilty. Took a while. It was 25 feet away, didn't feel anything. 22 years goes by, and now we're starting to, I know we do get reflective in our old age, but they're starting to really, and there they talk about, and it gives you a glimpse and a picture of what transpired, how he was begging for his life. Don't do this, don't do this, and what they did. And so, let me finish out the chapter so we can finish it up and call it in mind. It's almost 7:30. And so, Jacob tears his clothes. He's mourning. These kids that know very well where he's at let him believe he's dead. And so all of his sons and all his daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted, and he said, "For I shall go down into the grave to my son in mourning." Thus his father wept for him, and now the Midianites have sold him in Egypt to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard. Now but we pick up in 38, the story of Potiphar and how that moves this whole thing forward. That's an amazing story, though, isn't it? And as this plays out, and we're seeing this, God's hands in all of this. A world famine is coming, and God is using Joseph to not only be able to keep his family alive, but feeds the world system of that time, which was from out of Egypt. Egypt was the center of the world in that time period. As in Jesus' time, it was the Roman Empire, and it'd be the idea of being where we are as the United States today, and the whole, the chain of events in the world system is the place that we have today. Amazing story. Hope you got something out of that. Any questions? You guys have something to say? I know we're doing a lot of talking tonight. Get rid of this. But there's a lot there, isn't there? Yeah. And as we see this story progress, we're going to see how the enemy works and what the enemy does. But we're going to see God's hand in all of this, bringing this whole thing to pass. And that's what we put our trust in. There's things that we don't understand. There's some things that bring turmoil. And instead of wringing our hands and saying, "Oh Lord, why?" we should have said, look up and say, "Lord, I know you have purpose and reason. What can I glean and learn from this as you move me forward in life, and you move me forward for purpose?" And that's what's been going on here. It's an amazing story. Let's close with a word of prayer. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this time. We thank you for this night. We thank you for your word. We thank you for the young man Joseph, and that he's went through the story that's there and the things that we can learn from it, to be able to look and see how we should put our faith and trust in you no matter what we face, whether we go into a pit or we go into slavery. If we belong to you, we belong to you. And Joseph understood that, even as a very young man. And so, Father, as we thank you for this time tonight, we thank you for your word, and be with us, Lord, and use us to bring glory to your name. In Christ's name I pray. Amen. Amen.